Would the election of a moderate GOP speaker via bipartisanship be conceivable? Currently, there are a few options for the House GOP and the House as a whole. The first is the most obvious. Elect Jim Jordan as Speaker. He's more socially conservative and anti-interventionist terms of foreign policy than Kevin McCarthy was. And he was also involved with the former president's 2020 election complications. So that might make it difficult to get all of the GOP -14 votes to get him across the threshold. The next most obvious solution, only involving Republicans, would be the return of Kevin McCarthy. However, this solution would also come with its own complications. McCarthy would need to win back the cooperation of the same Republicans who decided to oust him, and has essentially shut down the idea of making a deal with the Democrats. This would be very difficult. The third solution is a bipartisan speaker. The Democrats, barring absences, have all voted in the exact same way in every round of voting for the speaker this year. So for now, one can consider their 212 votes a unified entity. That means all that would be necessary to get a bipartisan speaker is 5 Republicans. However, support for a bipartisan speaker comes with the possibility of losing support within the party. If any Republican decides to vote for Hakeem Jeffries, or even a more moderate Democrat, they are essentially giving up their seat come 2024. The other option for a bipartisan speaker would be a moderate Republican. In the House, most of the well-known ones their seats in 2020: Cheney, Kinzinger, Upton, Amash, etc. So choosing any of them as speaker would be unprecedented, at the very least complicating it. In the House, there's Don Bacon, and that's pretty much it. But he could be an option too. What do you all think though? Is the election of a bipartisan speaker within the realm of possibility? It really comes down to what group flinches first. If moderates flinch, then Jordan is in. If conservatives flinch, then probably McHenry, who may be a decent compromise for both sides. It doesn't look like it will get to a point where you can only vote for either Jordan or Jeffries. But that would be an interesting way to find out who flinches. Trump's 2020 election complications? That's a nice way of sanitizing what he and his Confederates did. Also, Democrats aren't obligated to help Republicans govern. Republicans are ostensibly big boys, and it's incumbent on them as the majority party to pick their speaker. If you think otherwise, I would encourage you to Google Merck's Law. The Democrats gain nothing from voting for any Republican for speaker. And no one should expect them to rescue the Trump-loving insurrectionist party from anything. The simplest point is that a bipartisan speaker is a colossal failure for the Republican Party. Being unable to agree with each other this long is embarrassing. Being unable to agree with each other to the point you hand power to the minority party is on another level. Somehow I think even at their current level of dysfunction they'll be able to avoid that. It's not as long as the so-called moderate Republicans are terrified of getting turfed by a hard-right MAGA in next year's primaries. Judging by just how off the rails the GOP activist base has gone in recent years, they may get one. Even if they fall completely in line. Trump was right when he said the party is eating itself right now. Not likely, since Republicans have shown they would rather burn it down than work with Democrats. Plus, there are no moderates anymore. If there was, they could agree on that person as speaker. Why do we always ask the Dems to reach across the aisle? Republicans are in charge, they should have 2 for once. In my opinion, absolutely not. The GOP is completely dysfunctional and basically worthless. The so-called moderates have done nothing but enable the crazy right wing. If 10 moderates had the balls to go to tell the crazies to knock off their crap, or they'd vote for Jeffries as Speaker. They could solve the problem themselves. The whole pathetic party is scared of alienating the MAGA idiots. The last thing Dems should do is help them. They would never acknowledge the help. Stand back and let them implode. Make sure every camera you can find stays focused on their failure. They all deserve it. Election complications is a nice way of saying failed violent insurrection with multiple convictions. I mean, it's suicide within the GOP either way. I think eventually the shutdown pressure has to reach a point where people like Bacon and Garcia feel it's literally impossible for them to win re-election just by virtue of their party association with the clusterfuck caucus. If that point doesn't arrive, then there's no reason to believe anyone's going to pick suicide by primary, let alone for someone like Gates to concede when he is currently winning in the court of Republican voters' opinion. I think it is within the realm of possibility. More likely something like 50,100 Republicans split off and cut a deal with 150 Democrats. Though more likely this voting bloc keeps the whole thing unofficial and just run stuff from the committees with no official speaker at all. What even is a moderate Republican these days? Somebody that will plainly say that Trump lost in 2020? I noticed in my career that people who were loyal tended to do better than people who were smart. And that applies in politics too. No. There's no candidate for Speaker that can get to 217 on a bipartisan basis. Any moderate Republican candidate to grab a few moderate GOP members to majorly break rank with their conference would be someone that would lose many more Democratic members. Liz Cheney, for example, would be a hard no for at least 40-50 Democrats. You're unlikely to find over 50 GOP House members right now that would break with their conference to vote her in. The only way I see Dems voting for even a moderate Republican speaker is if the deal includes the government funded at current levels through beginning of 2025 funding for Ukraine and Israel, and it would have to be a very moderate Republican, of which I can't even think of one in the House anymore. It's turned into a Trump sycophant party there. Is there a Republican House member that is not a fascist? I'm honestly unaware of any Republican House member that is not a fascist. If there is not a Republican who is not a fascist, then the next question is there such a thing as a moderate fascist? I'm unable to conclude that such a person exists. Fascism is defined by its delusional malevolence, often manifested in various poisonous flavors of fascist theocratic oligarchies, such as seemingly the case today. So truly, I'm at a loss as to what metric is being used to justify ascribing an honorific of moderate to any Republican House member. Dems would never help elect a Republican speaker. They vote in lockstep, especially on things like this. And why should they? As long as the Republicans want to keep embarrassing themselves, the Dems will let them. I think Democrats should pick a Republican, whoever they can find that's moderate. Does that exist? And then pick that person with additional Republicans. Of course, that completely breaks the Republicans' majority of the majority rules policies. But who cares? Government needs to function. If Democrats unilaterally pick someone, then that speaker is going to have to tone down the crazy. If that means only softball, generally acceptable bills get presented, then at least government functions. The Republicans vote by secret ballot, right? Doesn't that mean some moderate Rs could vote for Jeffries without facing backlash? To your average Reddit user, what moderate means is must march 100 in lockstep with far-left progressive agenda and never deviate from it once. Democrats love this. They will do nothing to help the Republicans. Neither cares about America. As the far-right wing of the Republican Party only cares about getting on television, not actually doing any work.